Coronavirus?
Yeah, but specifically versus liberty, because this is not an angle that's really being talked about at all in the mainstream media. I don't even really hear much from alternate media about this, really. I think people are kind of in a mode of panic. Panic is always a great time to take people's rights away because they'll give them away. You know, there's an old saying that if a person doesn't have security, they will gladly give their rights away. And you have a situation right now where a lot of people are basically working on bad information, downright misinformation, gossip. In a situation like that, a lot of people will do rash things because they're acting on, again, bad information. And this is one of those things. It's a developing story as far as the extent of the coronavirus and what the real effect is. But I kind of want to put some pointers out there and some key points that people need to kind of be aware of. You know, first of all, anybody I think with half a brain understands that the numbers out of China are not accurate. Okay, so we're talking about a communist regime, and people tend to sometimes forget that because China is a big trading partner with the entire world, essentially. It is the world's manufacturing plant. And so people forget what type of regime it has. The sort of irony of the whole situation is, especially from a liberty standpoint, is that there's probably not any other country in the world that has both the will and the ability to do what China has done. And what I mean by will is the type of government they have, specifically being a communist government and an oligarchy, if you will, that is ruled by the Communist Party. And then the other side of that is they have the ability because China is a rich country, relatively speaking to other countries. It's the second largest economy in the world. So they have both the will and the ability to do things that no other country can really do in terms of the amount of people that they've quarantined. And we're talking about like over 100 million people that have been quarantined in that country. That would never happen here, I don't think. I just don't think it's possible. The logistics of it just don't work. The attitude of the citizens don't work. It just wouldn't happen, I don't think. We'll see. I guess we'll see as this thing progresses, and we'll see how big it gets here in the United States.
Well, just to play devil's advocate here, I mean, Roosevelt did intern the Japanese during World War II. You know, if we thought it was a matter of national security, could people be buffaloed into allowing massive quarantines, citywide quarantines? Maybe.
Yeah, that's see when you use that comparison, the scale just isn't there. It's just not there. There just weren't that many Japanese Americans. You know, they're just and also one thing that's interesting about that, taking that example. For instance, they wanted to implement, an internment in Hawaii, and they couldn't because if they had, they would have destroyed the economy in Hawaii because the Japanese citizens and Japanese residents were a huge part of the economy of Hawaii, and it's not because they didn't want to; it's because they realized they would just paralyze the territory. It was territory at the time, and also it's important to remember. Japanese on the East Coast were not interned either. So we're talking about a pretty limited scope, and we're talking about World War II and the sensibilities that people had after Pearl Harbor. Talking about
and
the
that's
racism,
the big difference.
Yeah. And also the racism, which you know what I mean. It's
right.
It's not in the same position that it was then. But really, what I'm talking about is the scale. The scale of what the Chinese have done is astronomical compared to, I think, what any other nation is capable of.
So how many people are being quarantined, do you think, in China?
I know the last figure I heard was over 100 million. Over 100 million.
Over 100 million. And that's probably low because that's the official Chinese figures.
And I think I am low. I think the number was bigger than that. I'm just, I don't want to go overboard, but I know it was over that amount. And I just don't think that would ever happen in the United States and other countries.
That's what 7 or 8% of the Chinese population.
Right.
somewhere
Yeah.
around
They
there.
got well, billion people, so it's about 10%, right?
Well, they have one point,
So,
I think higher than that. I think it's like over 1.5 billion people.
but again, just the sheer scale of it is
Sure.
mind-boggling.
Yeah, mind-boggling. Yeah, yeah. We didn't
But
have 5% of the population. 5% of the population is not Japanese. It isn't today. It certainly wasn't at the time of World War II.
right.
Yeah.
So, but the sort of interesting thing to me about it is, on the one hand, if the coronavirus is contained to some extent, it's obviously not contained completely because we have cases all over the world. But if it is contained to some extent and it doesn't really become the huge epidemic that we kind of feel like it's going to be, it's only going to be because of China's incredibly stringent measures, which does beg the question, how do you deal with this in the context of liberty? These are extreme measures that the Chinese are implementing. There's a source that actually I have subscribed on the Liberty Starship YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a PhD who does he does training for nurses, and
Okay.
he's really good about coming up with the current statistics. He does a post every day, and he does a really good thing on statistics, and he has a lot of sources because he's traveled all over the world teaching. And he mentioned in a previous post that he had some boots on the ground in China that were reporting to him, and it's really interesting. He was talking about how just to go get groceries, you're going to go through 3 checkpoints. And of course, that basically means you're going to be checked 6 times at least. Because the second you walk out of your apartment building, the local party guy, because I didn't even know this, again, with people having their perceptions of China versus the reality, apparently most of these apartment complexes have a party leader living there. So the party leader is now basically the doorman, and he's standing there with a thermometer, to put in your ear. So you got him. Then you're going to have at least one
Scary, isn't it?
checkpoint. What's that?
That's scary, isn't it?
Right. And then you're going to go through at least one police checkpoint on the street. And then there's going to be another one at the grocery store. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, you have to go through all those again on the way back. And it's that wouldn't happen here. That's what I'm trying to say. That just I don't think even if we wanted to do that because the mechanism isn't there. We can't ask, for instance, I live in a townhouse complex. There's no
Mm-hmm.
local party official here to take on that role. It's just a completely different system.
Now, not to get too far afield here, but something you just said about these checkpoints, wouldn't that spread the virus? How are they sterilizing? If they're sticking, as you said, a thermometer in their ear, however they're doing it, if they're measuring the temperature of people who go through these checkpoints, how on earth are they sterilizing that equipment quickly enough to process the number of people they have to process?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, when you go to the doctor, they have those little covers that they take off, right? So each cover
Okay.
is different that you put in somebody's ear. Do they have that many in China? I don't know. That's a good question. Or are they
Could
trying
be.
to just swab these things? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an excellent question.
Yeah, and
But
they do have laser detectors right now for temperature. I have one that you can take the temperature of, say, your oven, uh, just point the laser at it. But I don't see that happening in China, and I wonder if some of these measures are going to backfire. Not
no,
not that I'm hoping they will or that I'm rooting for, but that sounds scary. That all these people are just going to be cross contaminated. One person gets it, and then everybody behind him in line gets it as well. Um, yeah.
it's a valid question. I would say that I would kind of assume that they have those covers like they do when we go to the doctor here.
I
Um,
sure hope so.
but because obviously, the whole point of this is to contain the virus. But the other part of this is, of course, if you do have a fever at any of these checkpoints, they grab you, and they take you. So, And I don't see that as something that could happen in most countries. Even most countries, if they wanted to do that, I don't think a lot of countries have the ability to do that. They don't have any place to take them, for one thing. And so the situation in China is very unique, I think, very,
Mhm.
very unique. And again, it does beg the question of how do you respond to things like this in the context of liberty? Um, like I said, I don't think on practical terms a system like that would work here. I don't think it could happen. Um, is it possible that maybe a glimpse into the future? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a pretty big stretch. I could see maybe stores doing something like that. I could see something like that where stores could set up some sort of a checkpoint and not allow people inside if they were exhibiting symptoms, fever,
Maybe
that
they
kind of a
should.
thing.
You know,
Uh,
I hate to say it, but if there's a real outbreak, if thousands of lives are at risk, maybe that's not the worst thing to do.
well, also from liberty, I always say goes both ways because also in that context, of course, our stores are not state owned. So
No.
if a business chooses to do something like that, I think they're completely within their rights to do that. I don't think that's something that they should be condemned for. That's their right to do that, and if they want to try to protect their customers in that way, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily.
Hmm.
Now there is another side to that, which is you have people in this country who are very isolated, and even if they are sick, they don't really have the luxury of being able to get food delivered to them necessarily. So, you know, there are things, like I guess Uber Eats, Amazon. There's other supermarkets that will deliver food to you, but I don't think that
Yep.
they're in widespread use. And of course, the other issue is whether the usage is
Maybe they
is
will be
is
soon.
enough. Is the capacity there to deliver food on that kind of a scale? Um,
You
that's
know, I don't. In the United States, at least, I don't think that would be a problem. I think that there's a lot of people who are driving Uber who are looking for a side hustle who would be glad to pick up those routes and to increase capacity for that. I don't think there'd be. I think that's kind of the wave of the future. Coronavirus or not, I see that being a really fast growing market.
Oh, I think it's a fast growing market. I'm just curious whether the capacity is there. And actually, the other side of it is what about the controls? Because there really are
Mhm.
no controls when it comes to Uber Eats. I've used Uber Eats several times, myself, and there's nobody checking these guys to make sure they're not sick or anything like that. So it could be a method of actually
Mhm.
spreading the virus, unfortunately. So,
Could
but
be.
anyway, um, but I do think that this angle isn't being discussed as much as it really should be because these discussions should be taking place before we start implementing certain controls or certain measures rather than after the fact, and we're just reacting. Because the worst thing, I think that the biggest message I want to put out there is the worst thing is for people to panic because no matter what, the worst case scenario of the coronavirus, this is based on the Chinese figures, is about a 3% mortality rate. And pretty much everybody believes the Chinese numbers are wrong because they are a communist regime and they lie. So,
Right.
and there's also error in that because the problem with the coronavirus is because it manifests with flu like symptoms and because a lot of people never actually get sick, even though they are carrying the virus, it makes it harder to gauge how many people are actually infected. And you don't know how many kits, for instance, that the Chinese authorities actually have. So even in the best case scenario, their numbers are wrong just because of,
Yeah.
of how widespread it is. What you probably should look at are the numbers coming out of South Korea and the numbers coming out of Italy, which are more around that 1% mortality rate. And those are going to be much more reliable. So we're looking at that's what we're looking at. And the thing is, that's it's all about really how many people get infected because the larger number of people infected obviously the larger number, just the raw number of people that will die, regardless of what the actual mortality rate is. And the that's what people should be kind of looking at. And again, it's important not to panic, and it's important because all that's gonna do is make the situation worse, and it's going to cause other problems that are gonna make the coronavirus itself look like a walk in the park. Because if people don't respond in a rational way, that's what's going to cause, I think, the real problems in this outbreak, not the virus itself.
Yeah. I wanted to just share one thing related to that. I don't think we've mentioned so far. The Chinese have a lot of people in concentration camps right now, or work camps, or whatever you want to call them. Um, we said never again during the Holocaust, and I don't know how seriously we take that because, of course, the Chinese we don't know how many Uyghurs in detention. And are they vulnerable? Oh, you bet they are. They're being kept in close conditions. The Chinese don't care if they live or die, frankly. You and I have talked about, the Chinese are sending men to fill homes where the men have been taken. It's absolutely disgusting, but this is what's going on. And that doesn't even cover the Laogai, their equivalent of the Gulag, where they have prisoners of all ethnicities who are political prisoners. What's going to happen to them? We can expect huge outbreaks, and the numbers are not going to be reported. They are not going to tell us how many prisoners are infected. They're not going to tell us how many prisoners die. They don't care. There are millions of people here who are at risk, and it's absolutely disgusting. It's an absolute, just heart-wrenching tragedy.
Yeah, I actually, one of the things that I had heard was this is becoming an issue in Iran. Apparently, there's a major prison in Iran that's starting to have an outbreak, and that's going to be a huge problem. Anything, hospitals too are going to be a problem. Unfortunately, ironically, a hospital might be the worst place for you to be at, in a situation like this, because hospitals, prisons, any place where people are stuck. In fact, those new deaths that were reported on CNN, those are from a long-term care facility, from a nursing home. There were like 4 people that died at a nursing home, and that nursing home has been shut down. So if you have parents or something like that that are in a facility like that, that's where the real problems can happen, because they don't have anywhere to go. So places like that can just become an incubator for this, similar to what happened to the cruise ship in Japan. The cruise ship just became an incubator for the virus and infected all sorts of people that otherwise, I'm sure, would not have been infected. That was a really, that's a black eye for Japan, the way they handled that whole situation, because it didn't have to be like that, and they made it worse. They made it worse. So
yeah.
Did you want to move on to the next topic?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So I want to share my screen. Sorry, that was kind of an abrupt. Can we do a little bit of a segue there? Just put a bow on that. So what's the big takeaway that people should about coronavirus and Liberty?
Well, I think the main thing is that I want people to understand is that this is not the end of human civilization. That the numbers actually are relatively low. They're much worse than the flu. The flu is something like a 0.06% death rate or something like that. It's very, very small. And so, yes, the death rate is higher. There's no doubt about it. But it's something that while it can be a problem depending on the numbers of people infected, and certainly if you're one of those people that happens to be critically ill,
it is a problem.
It's going to be a problem. But what we're seeing is most of the people that are dying, at least the data that I've seen, indicates that most of these people have compromised immune systems. They're over the age of 50. One thing that's really interesting is very few children are contracting this virus, which is a really good thing if you have kids. So just try to keep yourself informed and don't panic, and maintain some of those common sense things like social distance, washing your hands, things like that. Those are the things that are going to keep you out of trouble. So just don't panic, because I think that the media is going to try to make you panic because it's a news story and that's the way they are. To them, that's what their job is, to stir things up, and that's not what we need right now. I need to take a step back and again look at the data from Italy and South Korea if you really want to know what's going on. Because again, those numbers out of China are wrong. The numbers out of Iran are worthless. I mean, the Iranians. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. I think that that whole country could become infected the way that they're so poorly managing things. I had no idea Iran was that bad. I mean, their healthcare system is just a shambles, apparently.
It's a black box. We don't know what's going on in Iran, really. You can't really travel there as an American. So,
well, it's just funny because initially when they were doing this, they were doing something ridiculous. Like they said, we have like 60 cases and 20 people dead. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, they're not testing. You know what I mean? that data is worthless. The number of dead. That might be something that's accurate, but the fact of the matter is they just don't have the capacity to test. So those numbers are just about worthless.
right.
They just don't have any capacity. And then of course, they have these massive rallies. They're still doing these massive rallies to the situation there is bad. That's very bad.
But let's hope it's contained.
Yes,
in the
absolutely.
United States, certainly, and abroad.